I get to cast a spell in Hogsmeade. I never knew what 120 miles per hour felt like until Fast and Furious Supercharged. I never thought coming face to face with a hungry T-Rex would make my dad scream so loud.
And I have never felt more scared or alive.
If you haven't been to Universal Studios Hollywood lately, come see what you've been missing. Plan your visit online and save at universalstudioshollywood.com. Restrictions apply.
Blog Talk Radio.
Hoor jy die magtige dreuning? Oor die veld kom dit wyd gesweef. Die lied van 'n volk se ontwaking, wat harte laat sidder en beef.
Ek smoeg vir die vrese waarmee ons moet lewe, vir guns en vir moord en vir rape. Ek smoeg vir die bad news, vir Zuma en sy views, van ons op TV moet kyk. Ek wil nie meer hoor hoe ons tieners begrawe, oor niemand hul steur aan die wet. Ek wil nie meer lees van affirmative action of beklei om te hou wat ek het. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat lief kiesem en skryf en stry, oor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. Ek siek vir Malema, sy leuns en sy sê maar, ons hou maar ons mond en betaal. Ons kruip weg in kampe, word blind vir die rampe, en bid dat die Heer ons omhaal. Daar's Winnie Mandela, wat mense verbrand het, maar nou wil sy huil in haar hand. Die staatskas is leeg en die ANC jeug saai verwoesting en pyn deur ons land. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat lief kiesem en skryf en stry, oor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. Het betaal vir die grond waar sy kinders se kinders kan bly. Maar sy huis en sy lande is nou in die hande van die vyand teen wie hy moes stry. Ons kinders verstaan nie waar kom al vandaan nie, hul erfenis is uitgewis. Geen volkslied of vlag nie en geen erewag nie vir die helde wat daar nie meer is. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat lief kiesem en skryf en stry, oor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat lief kiesem en skryf en stry, oor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. En ons reg om hier te kan bly.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's edition of Radio Free South Africa. I hope that you've had a pleasant week in between last week's show and today. This is your guest host, Gertjan Zwiggelaar. a native Dutchman born in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, but I have spent most of my life in Canada. If I'd had my druthers, I really would have liked to spend a bit more time of my youth in the Netherlands. It was pretty good, but 9.5 years there. It certainly put a lot of that Dutch culture into me, and those are formative years. But anyway, we have a lot of stuff to talk about, not me. Karin, unfortunately, is still not able to attend to this program herself, and therefore she's continuing to entrust this to me, and I will try and endeavor to do as good a job as is necessary to continue to maintain the high standards that you listeners have become accustomed to from Karin. And so my best wishes and prayers do go out to Karin. I have been trying to call her today, but she's obviously very, very busy, and I have not been able to get in touch with her. If you are listening, Karin, please give me a call on my landline because it is important that I talk with you. Some weird things happening to me lately. It's very strange, but I did receive some emails or an email recently, a few days ago, with some attachments that I was supposed to look at, and when I finally got to doing that, the entire email has disappeared. It's not in my junk files, it's in my trash, it's nowhere in my inbox, absolutely, completely, and on both computers. It gets really strange, and so that's kind of perturbing. I have a contact in South Africa, Jan Lamprecht, who, in addition to my contact with Queen Jenny of the Khoisan people, I have not had any contact with the Queen recently, and so I have no real updates regarding their endeavor. That is the Khoisan people endeavoring to secede a significant chunk of South Africa to create, a new state, the United State of Good Hope. So I haven't heard anything further about that. But my other contact, Jan Lamprecht, sent me an email in which he updated some information, and so I thought maybe I would just read some of the points that he raised in this recent email he sent me. So he's headlined this with a title, Important South African Stories. The first one, the Jewess Lauren Southern gets all the credit for the first ever documentary, quote unquote, about South Africa's whites. This is typical Jewish lying. Melve produced a documentary titled The Last of the Boers in 2013 already. The real story, as can be seen in the 4 emails I've published, which come from Soutlander's Simon Roche, Melve and the popular alt-right Canadian journalist Faith Goldie, is this. Faith Goldie was working with the Soutlanders, and she had bought plane tickets to South Africa, as well as getting vaccinations to come here and do video work on the plight of the whites. The Soutlanders dumped her and instead let the Jewess Lauren Southern come to South Africa to get the credit. You can read it in the 4 important emails I published. So I haven't had a chance to look at these previous emails, but some of you actually likely know Jan Lamprecht and his work, and I will provide some links in case you don't, and you can certainly assist him with the work that he's doing in South Africa to help raise awareness regarding the plight of the white people of South Africa. And their plight is a very dire one. I wish I could put on a radio show all smiles and chuckles about South Africa, but golly, I don't see a whole lot of good stuff in South Africa. Just a moment, I have a phone call coming in, and so I'm just going to put on some music, and I'll be right back. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, a wonderful piece of music that is from Karin's music file. It is called Die D-STEM. Yes. So anyway, that was a radio or a telephone call that I needed to take, but it is not an update regarding what I was hoping the update would be that I was looking for. So let's get back to Jan's information regarding Simon Roche, about whom I have some suspicions. Simon was launched internationally by Melve of the Conscious Consumer Network, who is a South African woman living in Europe. She runs several publicly funded projects, some of which help whites in South Africa. She produces quarterly financial reports and posts them in public. She began receiving credible information from multiple sources that Simon Roche had received a lot, and that's in capital letters and quotation marks. Oh, pardon me, no, it is between stars, a lot of money in the USA, and that it was not being used to assist whites as the Southlanders claimed. So in February 2018, she wrote an email to Simon Roche to ask him to give her some feedback. Simon Roche then blind copied an unknown number of people. His rambling email is filled with attacks on another woman while avoiding replying to the original question. One of the people he copied, Faith Goldie, came back and directly contradicted what he had written. I've published all the emails, including Melve's final analysis and her statement to him, and this is your last chance. The video... Okay, so there are some links that I will attempt to put up that will show you some of this information that Jan is talking about. His own investigations into Simon Roche has led him to give him a pretty good idea of how much money the Zuidlanders got in the USA, but like Melve, he won't say what he believes the number actually is. He'll just say that it's a lot, and it totally contradicts Simon's email reply. Jan also has reason to believe that American churches are giving money to the Zuidlanders. Simon Roche recently appeared on the Jew, shill, and scumbag Alex Jones show. Interesting. Jeff Renz calls him the fat man. It's interesting. Alex has gotten some negative publicity of late from the alternate news, but with all due respect for all his bombast and everything, he was one of the earlier ones that developed the alt news, prisonplanet.com. And he did bring out some information that we needed to know, and he did it in a way that caught attention. And so I don't know. I don't personally listen to Alex because I find his voice a bit grating. It's a bit, and I can't stand Paul Watson. And so, it's not really but I mean, a lot of the information that's coming out of either Prison Planet or other sources, it's just, I look at it and I shrug my shoulders and I go, okay, what else is new? It's same old. It's been going on for a long time. It just seems to be that the manure pile is just getting higher and thicker, more the size of a pyramid and stinking to high heaven. And of course, we know who's responsible for building that pyramid. But anyway, I think that I have concerns myself about Simon Roche and that whole Southlander project. I don't personally trust it. I think that there's something very nefarious about it. Apparently, the people who have an opportunity to join that particular plan to withstand the potential genocide of white people in South Africa, as in to put up a bulwark, a fortress, if you will, a place where only white people develop some sort of a fortified encampment. The people that can join his movement require fairly expensive vehicles and all kinds of accoutrements that the poor people, and certainly not the squatters, can afford to pay in order to join that venture. And indeed, the location is very suspect as far as I'm concerned, considering it's somewhat in the middle of the entire mess that is South Africa. So in other words, the place would be completely surrounded by those descendants of the sub-Saharan and Central African interlopers who drifted down there and are now laying claim to property to which they have absolutely no rights, since they were never the indigenous people of that region. The only indigenous people of the region are the Khoi Khoi and the San. And indeed, as far as connections made with Negroes, whites didn't see those Negroes for 150 years after they had already well developed, South Africa, the Transvaal and Rhodesia, and the Portuguese developed Mozambique. Of course, now Mozambique is a troubled place. Rhodesia is now Zimbabwe, and it is, those blacks in there, they're crying, "Oh, white people, please come back. Please, please. We can't do anything for ourselves. We need you." It's always a story with the Negroes. I wish we white people stopped sending money and aid over there to Negro land. We just keep basically dumping, our hard-earned efforts, our money, our wealth, the sweat of our brows down a shithole, and that's called Africa. Negroes are barely able to fend for themselves. They still practice magic and cannibalism. That's all a fact. And those are the creatures that drifted down into that region that is South Africa. And now, step by step, they are turning everything backward into a pre-Stone Age reality. And the fact that they're in Zimbabwe crying for a return of white farmers is an open admission that they can't do anything for themselves. And that's the story down there forever. I mean, Africa is one of the richest continents on the planet as far as resources are concerned, and the Negroes just can't do anything with it, and they're always crying and looking to white people to help them out, and then at the same time they hate us and they want to kill us all, infect us with diseases, through their rapists and so on. But a lot of that is, of course, Negroes with a Muslim hive mind infection being prodded by the Jews. And my take is that this Simon Roche chap, I have some suspicions about his genealogy. Maybe somebody knows a bit more about that. Okay, so what you have is a situation where these Negroes, they will say, kill all the white farmers, take over the farms, absolutely destroy them within the space of a year or two, or maybe they are lucky and manage to hang on for 3 years. But eventually everything dies and everything goes to heck, goes to manure, turns to nothingness. They start starving, and then of course these libtard moronic people start sending aid, But the Negroes, the reason they blame their ineptitude on magic. The land is cursed. When the white people were being murdered or chased off the land, they cursed the land, and therefore the Negro can't make it work. That's how Negroes think. In South Africa, possibly elsewhere in Africa, but I'm aware in Africa, for example, they are so bizarre, these creatures there, that they take great offense. For example, if the train is late, and then they will take out their rage on the train, destroy it, trash it, whatever. or they rip up railway tracks and then of course crash trains. But really, people wake up to the fact that the Negro is not the same as a white man, and they don't think the same way. They are very they don't really think plans so far in advance. It's more on a day-to-day basis. And they have pretty basic instincts and interests, but they are definitely motivated to steal and to murder and towards cannibalism. In fact, an interesting story that I just picked up on is that there was a case in Paris recently, where a hapless victim was attacked by two black as night, bizarre, pre-medieval savages that had come from Negro land, probably the Cape, or even like the Cape Verde Islands is another source of these chimp hybrids. But they attacked a man and bit off an ear and part of his lower lip, and they ate that. They were eating that and raw, not cooked. And that's already happening in Paris. In fact, I also read recently, this is within the last probably about 3 weeks, there is evidence now of a restaurant in Los Angeles, actually, that's been identified as a place where human meat can be consumed. And so cannibalism is again something that never went away in Negro land, and certainly has never gone out of the the heart of the Negro, no matter what kind of a suit you put on him or what kind of a pretty Vuitton purse that you hang on her arm. Negroes are still Negroes. And, they may not manifest those traits necessarily now, but their offspring very well may. So a lot of that is very, very obvious and evident. Also, I have also read a report that on average in North America, that is in the United States, Negroes are paid a fairly hefty stipend every month to kind of keep them going and to kind of keep the lid on a pot that is about to explode, because of course they are all infected with this idea of Black Lives Matter, but nobody else's does, and that they was Kangs and they was Vikings and they was King Arthur and they was Cinderella and they was Walt Disney and whatever, right? Yeah, it's really bizarre. Negroes never invented anything. The only Negro that ever came up with anything was Washington Carver. It's George Washington Carver. It was a Negro guy who stepped on a peanut and came up with peanut butter. Yeah, and so that's really the extent of Negro inventions. White people have to realize that if it wasn't for us, and that's us, white people, the descendants of Celts and Frisians and Angles and Saxons and Rus, and the Danes and the Picts and the Scots and the Irish, include the Welsh. I'm joking. I love you, Welsh people. Your choirs are amazing. And and so on, the Iberians, the people from Switzerland, the Romansh. These are the white people of Europe, the Gauls, the Franks. Yeah, these are all the white people of Europe. They collectively been put into a group called Aryans or Caucasians, but we hail from all over the European continent. Very bizarre idea, the whole idea of continents. There's a little little river at one point where Europe is divided from Asia. This little meandering little stream, and both sides of the stream look exactly the same, but that's the border between Europe and Asia. All this political nonsense dividing us all up into these various continents. Well, I guess it's I suppose easier with regard to cataloging nations and locations and so forth, I suppose. But really, not that I'm proposing open borders. I'm not. I think that countries, nations, certainly have the right to prevent the influx of negative Untermenschen. Let me explain that. A negative force of hive-minded, low-intelligence, various human-simian hybrids that are hell-bent upon the destruction of white culture. And indeed, to these creatures, nothing is sacred. Our museums full of our art, the history of our mighty races, of our mighty white race, in pictures and in sculptures, photographs, all of it, the museums that house the literature, all of it is considered idolatry by these creatures, our novels and all of it. And subsequently, if they manage to worm their way into these places, they're not safe. They're not sacrosanct to these creatures. And indeed, what should be most sacred is our women, and they are raping them quite at random and doing horrible things, gang raping. In fact, there are these Muslim grooming gangs that form, and they start to prey on our younger girls. It's a wonder that they haven't been eradicated with extreme prejudice, with our anti-Muslim pedophile bug spray. And that's really what needs to happen, and we need to realize that the bottom of the whole story, as is identified in what I was reading you from Jan Lamprecht, the word Jew was there in those in his chat there, and how Jews take over the story and manipulate the information. We're all being screwed by those creatures, and they use their Muslim war dogs and their Negro pets to further an agenda that they've been hell bent upon for a long time, and have created indeed 2 world wars, are now gearing up for a 3rd one. This is actually kind of ongoing because nuclear warfare has been ongoing in the Middle East with the use of depleted uranium munitions. And of course, the Northern Hemisphere is being irradiated with effluent coming from the Fukushima Daiichi disaster that was evidently caused by Jewish malfeasance. Indeed, there's strong evidence to suggest that Jewish Israeli security people had tampered with the computer systems that handled the backup systems of the plant, and everything shut down one after another, over 30 different backup systems to prevent what happened from happening. And subsequently now the entire Pacific Ocean, northern Pacific Ocean, from about Orange all the way up to Alaska, everything's dying. There are completely empty tide pools devoid of life. Excuse me. But the Northern Hemisphere, of course, if you take a look at the map of the planet, the Northern Hemisphere is where mostly white people live, and cancer rates are going up. All kinds of weird deformities are being seen on sea life too, that's still living. But now we're finding orcas washing up on the beaches, and Oh, it's a very, very, very tragic story that has happened. And again, we see the hand of the Jewish entity there. And so really the question is, and I continue to raise it, at what point are we going to say enough is enough? Anyway, I am going to play a little bit of music just to take a wee break. My throat is starting to feel like it needs to find a drink of some kind. And so what I wanted to do is I'm going to play something very lovely, and it will only take a few minutes, but I'm scrolling through my music list here. What am I going to play? Okay, here's one. Something that's 6 minutes long, 6 minutes, 22 seconds. It's called I So Love the Harp. Hello? 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 I'm listening. Hello? 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 Callers. Hello? 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 I so love the harp. Yeah, that was music that I composed 2016, late 2016, in the fall of 2016, and that was played by the Amsterdammers Pro-Harmonic Orchestra. Yeah, I hope you like that. I quite enjoyed that piece. Anyway, we're talking about cannibalism, so let's move on. We've already covered that topic, and there are other meaty subjects, and the pun is completely intended. In Canada, people that wear well, I don't know, they claim to be people, but human-looking beings, bipedal life forms, wearing burqas, completely covered themselves and only their eyeballs showing and a hand, are able to obtain gun licenses, gun acquisition licenses in Canada, albeit to jump through the hoops for a Canadian who isn't covering his or her face. We have to jump through a ton of hoops to get firearm acquisition licenses, and it's very severely controlled up here. And indeed, white people have largely been disarmed, and there are cases when initially the gun grabs began here, people literally lined up in malls with smiles on their faces, hand over their firearms, some of which were antiques that had been handed down through generations, and handed them all into the RCMP, an organization of criminal thugs by and large, low-brow morons who barely can read and can barely write. You look at some of the scribblings they issue, you're wondering if you aren't dealing with a child. These are the minions of the Queen of England, who is the head of their organization, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They've done summary executions with tasers here. Oh yeah, don't kid yourselves. Canada is a police state. And in fact, Canada advertises itself with a Mountie on the back of a horse with a lance. Well, that lance, that's not for roasting hot dogs from a distance, that's for sure. And then, of course, dressed in the red livery of the British occupation forces. And so, yeah, Canada is a land that is under occupation by a rapacious entity known as the British Crown, a German Jewish family whose name is Sachin, Coburg, and Gotha. And they tried to cover it up and renamed themselves the Windsors. Meet the Windsors. Yeah. That's not a sitcom. There's no comedy there, that's for sure. Not a bunch of grim-faced, murdering, thieving creatures. They are all standing there, smiles and chuckles on their balcony, covered in glitter and baubles and so forth. Her Royal Majesty driving around in a 4-ton golden coach. Her hat alone is worth over £1 million. The crown, that is. Yeah, well, it's all quite something when you consider how many people in Great Britain, for example, are suffering hardship and suffering ever more hardship. Old people having to make a decision in the winter between eating and heating. That is, I think, obscene and is totally wrong. A small percentage of the Queen's wealth, of that family's wealth, could certainly alleviate the plight of the poor in Great Britain. But they like the idea of having people on their knees. It creates a kind of an overall negative vibe and a feeling of uneasiness and suffering and all of that. At the same time, these people are suffering and they're still waving, the flag when the Queen comes driving by in her, coach. Okay. Well, there's something happening that we need to be really, really careful about, and that is this incredible influx of these third and fourth world savages like say from Somalia and Eritrea and Sudan and Congo and so on. They are, in many cases, carrying very exotic diseases. Indeed, the Black Plague is on the increase again. Has come out of where did that come out of? It came out of southeastern Africa, Madagascar, indeed, and that is traveling up into Europe and coming into North America. There's a terrible typhoid that is essentially like a plague that is in Pakistan, and it is resistant to a treatment. So Pakistani typhoid is being imported into North America and Europe. And of course, Pakistani men, the Muslims, are notorious for their misogyny. And again, I repeat, having said this before, the Quran talks about the virgins, the houris, that these psychopaths, these men can meet up with in paradise, and they're all white girls, the color of corals, and red as rubies, which of course a white-skinned girl turns pretty red, exposed naked in some Arabic Muslim slave market. I mean, that's openly practiced. I watched a video of Muslims dressed as if they're in the desert. This is in downtown London somewhere, in the Warren that is downtown London. And they were openly selling girls. Yeah. One went for $150, I remember. Another one went for $15. Yeah. And so what we have is a whole lot of people that haven't really been paying attention to any of this. And then when you actually suggest that there is a problem, they think that those of us suggesting there's a problem with this third world and fourth world immigration and the importation of all of these exotic diseases for which we have really very little immunity, and of course is going to set up a tremendous market further for the pharmaceutical industry, largely Jew-owned and controlled, to further pump us with poisons to try and prevent us from catching some of these exotic diseases that are being brought here. But the diseases aren't just of the body, like they're not just those, but there's also the disease of the mind, which is this Islam. And having read the Quran a number of times in the preparation for a book on the Quran, which you can get through my website, stratofericus.com, and also through rents.com. It's called The Horror. Just take a look, you'll find it. It's not really something that I would want to see foisted upon my children and grandchildren, and indeed, that is what is coming. Islam is a suffocating blanket that has totally suffocated, destroyed, murdered the Christian population of North Africa. Now they're making significant inroads into Europe. We've had, to keep them out before. Well, this is, again, they just keep coming. And, of course, at the rate they're breeding, the Muslim man can have up to 4 wives. He can have concubines, and he can have pussy on the side when he's traveling. That's right out of the Quran. So, there's so much for fidelity to individual, women. I don't get why so many Western women are so pro these Islamic characters. Why are they so pro, Islam and the Muslims? And why do they call me a bigot and a racist for suggesting they're an extremely dangerous rape and death cult, and that they should all be sent back to sender, return to sender? And address is known: Somalia, Eritrea, Sudan, Middle Eastern countries. That mosques are weapons caches, so that's again something else. And how come, the RCMP isn't going into these places? You look at them, they're not active. There's nothing going on in these mosques, these little mosques that are being built up in various strategic locations in cities around Canada and in the United States. Indeed, now Dearborn, Michigan is essentially a Muslim city. I wouldn't step foot in Dearborn, Michigan. So they've taken that. Sweden has essentially been taken over already. Germany, they're still hard at it. But golly, Angela Merkel, that's the angel of death. And for anybody to suggest that she's somehow the spawn of Adolf Hitler, oh boy, don't be coming around my neighborhood espousing that silly nonsense. No, she is the spawn of Satan. Guaranteed, that woman is extremely dangerous and a disgusting, ugly old cunt at that. Sorry, but I had to use the C word because I don't know what other words appropriate to describe Angela Merkel. Ugh. Ooh, that woman, every time I see her face, I cringe. Oh, yeah. Well, what do we do, hey? Well, what we should do is collectively answer the Jewish question, because that really lies at the bottom of all of it. And really, until we do actually answer that question and address those parasites and expel them out of everything that they are so heavily engaged in, media, government, the courts, the law industry in general, modern medical practice, psychiatry, education, banking. They need to be expelled from all of those important enterprises. I think really, if we cannot relocate them to some place where they can practice their malfeasance without bothering the rest of us, that I'm all chill for that. I mean, we can certainly help them make their travel plans and suggest that maybe South Georgia Island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, somewhere South Atlantic, that might be an appropriate place. Or if we can afford the rocket ships, but of course that whole story is absolute nonsense anyway. We are not sending rockets past the dome or the Van Allen belts. We don't have that technology. We don't. And as far as those who supposedly have technology that allows them to travel hither and thither through space, well, it's my contention that some of the UFO activity may actually originate on this planet and possibly could be of origin within the crust or from the underside of the crust. And now as to whether the Earth is a sphere or not, or whether it's flat or a half a sphere, well, I'll just leave that open to those interested in pursuing that particular questioning. Whatever the story, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm here now in this reality. Now, whether it's flat or whether it's a globe, but, like I say, it makes very little difference to my living here. I've got a bunch of notes that I've written down, so I'm kind of just going through my notes here just to make sure that I cover enough interesting topics to keep you listening. So at this point, it is time to take a break for some advertising, and I do have a few ads queued up here, and so we'll move into those, and then I will be back shortly. Yeah, it's a fact. An armed society is a civil society. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that so many white people let themselves be disarmed by these cultural Marxified governments of people who think they're so important, who prattle about in parliaments, places where lies are spoken. How do you know that a politician is lying? His or her lips are moving. And that's the position you need to realize. I'm itching my nose here. You need to realize that government is a disease, and politicians are the vectors, and the nucleus of those vectors are the Jews. And they are the ones that essentially pull the strings. Everything that's good for Israel, that's what's promoted. but everything that's bad for the white race, that's promoted. And of course, most people don't make the distinction between the white-skinned Jews, the descendants of Khazars, and those of us who are the descendants of all those groups that I named earlier. You know, the Caucasian, the Aryan people. So, yeah, because we are both white-skinned, it makes it really difficult to differentiate. And so what often happens is that we, white people, are being, let's say, tarred and feathered with a brush that should really be used on the Jew, because they're the ones behind all of the troublemaking. They're the ones that do all the dark, dirty deeds from behind curtains and, you know, from under rocks. There's a quote that I love to share from the great and amazing Adolf Hitler. I memorized this quote because I think it's so appropriate. He said, I quote, "When you dig down a dung heap deep enough, all the way to the very bottom, what you will usually find, like a deer caught in headlights, is a Jew up to some nefarious scheme," end quote. I think that's quite appropriate. Now, at this point, I'm just going to talk about fundraising for a moment, and I will repeat this later again because it is, and I say again because, you know, we talk about fundraising on this program regularly every time because it is so incredibly important. In South Africa, you can help Jan Lamprecht, for example. He is a brave truth warrior and sticking his neck out, and he's promoting awareness of the plight of the white South Africans. You can send some funding to the South Africa Family Relief Project, Leah Dupre, and you can do that through the website for Radio Free South Africa. So that's radiofreesouthafrica.com. And this program is hosted on Resolution RDO Network and hosted on blogtalkradio.com. And so we're very grateful for them providing us the airtime to further awareness about what's going on in South Africa. And you can send some money to Karin Smith to help defray medical expenses, which are piling up and becoming ever more onerous, given the weird medical programs, medical insurance programs that exist in the United States. It's really bizarre that they haven't got something in place like what most of the other nations have, such as Canada, for example, where our medical care is taken care of. And I mean, there are some additional costs for, you know, certain extenuating situations and circumstances, but in general, the whole thing is covered, and that's completely covered by the tax base here in Alberta anyway. In other provinces, healthcare is a bit more expensive, but Alberta, we have likely one of the very best healthcare programs in the world here. Rich place, Alberta, but our economy is suffering. I mean, the oil patch isn't doing as well as it was, and Alberta, a large part of its income is dependent on oil revenues, but having had a succession of very inept governments, in my opinion, they haven't really negotiated the kind of oil revenues that other nations, say, such as Norway, negotiated. I'm aware that their royalties are somewhere up around 70%, and in Alberta, I think it's around 12%. So, you know, the revenue isn't huge. I mean, it's huge, but not what it could be. And we do pay fairly high prices for gasoline, which, given the abundance of oil that is here, you know, why do we pay these high prices for gasoline? So again, you know, and the whole thing is so totally manipulated. We have all these different service stations, and yet when the price of gasoline changes, it all changes exactly the same in every one of them. So much for competition. Yeah. I wonder how that's all going to fare down there in South Africa if the Negroes take complete control of everything. Already their ineptitude has resulting in a serious drought issue in Cape Town. The infrastructure there is starting to crumble, and and there's a drought, and water management skills, management skills in general is not something that is that the Negro has a proclivity for. So there you go. It's things are looking kind of bad, and now they have a new president there, Cyril Ramaphosa, who is also egged on by his friend Julius Malema. Both of them are extremely overt racists who absolutely despise white people, and the official policy now is to steal the land, indeed all the property of white people in South Africa without recompense. So given the fact that most white people have been disarmed, this is going to be a very unfortunate circumstance unfolding. There are 40-some million Negroes and less than 4 million whites, and the blacks have bandied about the idea that within 48 hours, all white people could be eradicated in South Africa, all in one fell swoop, 48 hours. And so that is what white people are facing, and without funds to help. I mean, indeed, there are white people starving in the land that was developed by their ancestors. It was not developed by the Negroes. And so, Negroes, all they can do is steal and copy. They don't invent things on their own. They can't run anything. So if they do in fact achieve their goal, then South Africa will be a third world, fourth world, dung heap, just like what blacks have done elsewhere. And so really, white people paying attention, it's important you help raise awareness of the plight of white people, and perhaps you can, one of the most powerful men on the planet is Donald Trump, President of the United States, albeit he's surrounded by Jews, dual citizenship traitors, but judging from the fact that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is falling in disfavor in the White House, I think, there may be hope there. It's maybe quite possible that Donald Trump is the knight in white armor, in shiny silver armor, let's say, on a white horse, and that has come to rescue us and rid us of the parasite once and for all. But I don't really see that, and, I'm not deluded, but we'll see. It's always good to stay hopeful, but temper that hope with some reason, of course. I think it's further time to take a break, and we're going to have a listen to some other music, because it's always nice to break up chatter with lovely sounds and give us something to reflect upon, so something meditative. I'm scrolling down. I don't want it to be too long, but I do like it to be reflective of spring, say. Here it is. We are in March, middle of March, and today was a very warm day here in Alberta, and lots of melting going on. We have lots of snow, but there's lots of melting going on today, so that's a good sign. And I did see yesterday a man and his woman, and they were each buying a bicycle, look-alike bicycles at a local store. And I thought, oh, that's very optimistic. I said to them, and said, yeah, spring's coming, so time to go biking. Yeah, my bike's sitting out here on the deck. It's covered in plastic. It's a good mountain bike, and boy, I can't wait to get back on my bike. Great way to exercise my legs. Also, I think I might take up swimming. I definitely think that's a good exercise to do when you're older, keeps all the joints going and so forth. So anyway, let's have a listen to Pastoral for Early Spring. A pastoral for spring, early spring. You could hear all the dripping, water dripping, and so on, things melting. Oh, it's going to be lovely when all the snow's gone. Skies are clear. You know what's a really good thing that people could be doing is to start watching some older television programs, like, for example, Father Knows Best. That's a brilliant television series. That's the kind of television that is healthy and wholesome, and the kind of things that you could expose your children to and not worry. It's interesting that the family in Father Knows Best, the Andersons, they happen to live in Springfield. And so when you actually start to examine that program, you start to recognize that the Simpsons drew some of their sort of inspiration, if you will, from Father Knows Best. There are also two girls and a boy in Father Knows Best, and of course that program is from the late 50s, early 60s, and it ran a number of seasons. It was highly popular, and it is obvious that the people portraying this family, the Andersons, that they had a very good personal relationship as well. That there's nothing forced in any of the acting and the interactions of the children with the parents. It is truly a wonderful series, and I highly recommend it. So, Father Knows Best. I remember that actually from when I was growing up as a child, and so I've been doing that lately, is going back to some of these old programs that I used to watch as a child growing up. Well, in the Netherlands, we didn't have a lot of television back in the 50s. In fact, my family was one of the first with a television on our block, and there was only 4 stations that could be picked up with this massive antenna that my dad installed on the roof, and a big knob, and it you could pick up a French station, a Belgian station, a Dutch station, and a German station, but there wasn't continual 24/7 television in those days. But there were programs for children. Rin Tin Tin was one that I remember watching, and that was broadcast in French. And then there was Casey Jones. It was broadcast in German. And then once, I believe, I watched an episode, one of the first episodes of the Flintstones, which indeed was meant to be an adult cartoon, and is the first place on television where a man and a woman shared a bed together. Wilma and Fred, they shared a bed. That's the first depiction of a couple in bed together. Indeed, in Father Knows Best, Mrs. and Mr., they sleep in separate beds. It seems odd to me to see that. But maybe, I suppose, you do get a better sleep. And if she has her own bed, chances are that you will maintain that blanket over you there. Hey, guys? I joke. it goes both ways, I'm sure. Wonder how many places in the world that people are fluoridated. I do have a suspicion that the geoengineering program that is seen in chemtrailing, for example, that is, I suspect, largely taking place over white nations. I don't know. Are they chemtrailing over Central and Sub-Saharan Africa? I don't know. Maybe somebody can fill me in on that. And you can certainly do that. Contact me through my website, stratofericus.com, or you can go to gertjan.ca. It'll take you to that website. And there's lots of information about me and contact information. I also do 2 other shows besides this one, radio shows on Friday morning on Eurofolk Radio. I'm down the rabbit hole with Alfred Schaefer, and now we've been joined by Alison Chabloz and, of course, Andrew Carrington-Hitchcock and myself. And, we make a kind of an interesting journey down a rabbit hole, discussing world events, updating on, truth warriors, those who are in jail, such as Monica Schaefer, for example. Something that people, if any of you are considering going to Germany, I highly recommend that you contact the German Tourist Board and specifically ask if you risk being grabbed and put in jail because you do not believe in the official story of the Holocaust. If you are what they call a Holocaust denier, and you are too vocal about it, as was the case of Monica Schaefer, she made a video that went viral, a YouTube video in which she apologized to her deceased mother for having been wrong about the Holocaust. Monica, all her life growing up, had bought into the official lie because, of course, she'd been pounded with the official story, the Shoah story, throughout her schooling in Canada. And so once she woke up to what really is going on, what really is the true story, and she made this video with her brother Alfred, and she was visiting in Germany and grabbed and hauled off to solitary confinement initially. She's not in solitary anymore. She is in a cell that she shares with several others. At one point, a 4-person cell she had to share with one other white woman and 3 Negroes from Nigeria. You can imagine. So, it's also overt what the Judaic entity is doing to those of us who are brave enough to speak the truth. But unless we do so, we're never going to answer the Jewish question. And now 2018 really should be the year when we finally address that once and for all and turn this planet back on track. Because, oh boy, we've sure been derailed a whole lot by those parasites, and they've done a whole lot of harm. Believe me. When you go into a website, take down this address. It's comeandhear.com. Comeandhear.com. You can read the Talmud in there. And once you start reading in there and you start learning what the Jew actually thinks and believes, you will be very circumspect around them, and you will likely not want to advance their agenda any further. In South Africa, a black person can go to a police station and actually rent a gun, and that could very well be a gun that was confiscated from a white person. Yeah. The murder rate in South Africa is the highest on the planet. There's something like 90 murders a day in South Africa now. And since 1963, since they've been tracking the farm murders, there's been over 90,000 farm murders. And most of those murders are tortured to death murders. And quite often the statistics do not include the family, just the boer. And so the statistic 90,000 may very well be a small figure, it'd be a lowball figure. It may be actually much higher. And if you're not aware, the atrocities committed by the savages in South Africa against white are so gruesome, are so barbaric that in some cases you'd even think that some of those Jewish inquisitors from the Spanish Inquisition would have maybe vomited or felt uneasy watching some of the things that these Negroes have done or are doing to hapless white people. In many cases, to white people that took them in. There's oftentimes these farm murders are committed by people that actually work on the farm. The farmer, because of the legislation in South Africa, they have to take in a farm worker, say a black man, a Negro. Because of affirmative action, it has to be a Negro. But he has to also take care of the Negro's entire family, house them, feed them, provide them with education. And in spite of all of that, because of some slight grievance or whatever, oh yeah, this is what happens, that disgruntled Negro worker reveals information to a gang, a stalking gang, let's say, up to 7 or 8 individuals, and they stalk this farmer for quite a while generally until they attack, and it's often done at night. And these farms in South Africa, they're spread out all over, far away from urban centers, just like out here in Alberta. Sometimes it takes hours for help to get to these places. By that time, it's usually too late. And the stories that are coming out of South Africa make you think that you're reading or listening to something that came out of, an earlier time, maybe the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages or perhaps the Renaissance. We call it the Renaissance, only the Dark Ages. But gosh, there was a lot of atrocity. In fact, the Spanish Inquisition was formed in the Renaissance, during the Renaissance, not in the Dark Ages, not in the Middle Ages, but in the Renaissance. But it was in the Middle Ages that there was an overt attempt made to keep the Muslims at bay, but that was a very minor attempt that really resulted in very little, and these are known as the Crusades. But when you actually look at the map of North Africa, the Mediterranean area, and you look at the history of the Crusades, you'll see that there was but a very small part of that region that was positively affected by the Crusaders coming in there. By that time, the Muslim numbers were already so large that they easily overran the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller and the Teutonic Knights that came down from Germany. And so, it is unfortunate. And then, of course, you do realize that the Jews opened the gates to Spain and let the Moors in. And so the Spaniards had a lot of trouble with Muslims for quite a long time until they managed to finally push them back. But same with Jews, like once people woke up to what Jews are up to, there's been 110 places worldwide that, Europe and in Central America, actually, Guatemala, in fact, Mesoamerica, that the village kicked the Jews out recently. I think it was actually last year or possibly 2016, but relatively recently. So, once you learn what they're up to, you can't help but want to get rid of them. It's just like when you walk into a kitchen, you discover an infestation of cockroaches. Yeah, here, there, and everywhere. That, in my opinion, is a perfect song. That song is amazing. That is truly a reflection of brilliance. And it is a fact. John Lennon and Paul McCartney, accompanied by George Harrison and Ringo Starr, that quartet together produced some very memorable music that is now considered classic, really. It's been around. I mean, they've been around a long time. Don't forget, they were already a band in the late 1950s, a skiffle band, and they were getting their experience in Hamburg and, in the Cavern Club in Liverpool, and gradually they gained some very excellent Jewish management. Of course, the Jews totally run pretty much the whole music industry, and already by that time, but with some brilliant management and some airtime out there, they gained a worldwide reputation. But I do believe it's well deserved. Of all the bands of the period, they are still one of those bands that whose music people play everywhere and is very readily recognized also. And so, yeah, I have a high regard for the Beatles, regardless of all the conspiracy theories that are out there pertaining to Paul. Did he die? Was he replaced? Were they some sort of an Illuminati organism? Are there all kinds of hidden messages in the songs? I don't know. I don't listen for any of it. I just really, I collected Beatles albums and 45s. I was a teenager. I wish I still had them. I have no idea where all that ended up. Gosh, it is a kind of a tragedy for some of us who moved a lot through our lives and through our youth, how much of our stuff has dissipated and disappeared, especially also if you have younger brothers and sisters that get into your stuff when you're traveling, for example. But some of that old stuff from our days growing up, gosh, if you have it, guard that jealously, because there is some very significant monetary value that has attached to, say, some old comic books, for example, of which I literally had stacks. I was a very avid reader, always have been, and an avid, when I was younger, obviously, an avid reader of comic books, and had literally stacks of them. Some of them first editions, Superman, Batman, all of it, Spider-Man, Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos, Sergeant Rock, all that stuff, Archie comics. But some of those comics in good condition are worth small fortunes today. And, I think back, and I do have a pretty good memory. I mean, I can't say that it's a photographic memory, but I do have a pretty good memory. And I do recognize and remember some of the titles of particularly memorable comic books, even from when I was like 12 years old or so. Yeah, anyway, believe it or not, but this is really true, and it is kind of bizarre, and maybe it's not atypical, I don't know, but I actually can remember the moment that I stopped babbling and actually started speaking words while I was lying in my crib. I do have very clear recollections of living in Amsterdam, when I was like a child of 3, and clear memories. And I've related those stories to my mother, and she, totally confirms them. And my mother, she's 93, and her memory is sharp. Well, not entirely, but for the most part, she is sharp as a tack, my mother. There's certainly no issues with any kind of dementia or Alzheimer's. I mean, she's moving a bit slower, but she can carry on a conversation, no problem. She reads, every day. She reads and reads and reads magazines and newspapers, mostly, but, she does keep her mind certainly engaged. And of course, the more you read, your mind has to process always this new information. So it does keep your brain physically exercised. Reading is something I think that's really essentially important and should be strongly encouraged. If you can read, you can learn stuff. And that's how we pass things on. Of course, Negroes never invented writing, couldn't pass anything on. That's why they don't have any kind of a complex culture even. And so they come into our white nations and they usurp our cultures. And then they try to make it as if it's their own. We was all born in Africa, which is, of course, total nonsense. What happened in Africa is something completely different than what happened with regard to the evolution and development of white races. We're a relatively new evolution, but in the case of the Negro, I firmly contend that they are some kind of a human simian hybrid, and that they were specifically designed in Negro land to carry on the kind of tasks that a bipedal entity with arms and hands with fingers can more easily do than, say, a cow or let's say some sort of a other creature. At least they can learn to talk, and they can think a little bit, and they can do things. And so they were bred to be miners and whatever. But that goes back long time ago. We did not all come out of Africa. There's three very distinct developments of humanity that I think are identifiable, but we certainly didn't all rise out of Africa, out of Negro land. So any of those kind of claims made by them or others is absolute nonsense. Okay, let's go to some more music, and I think these might be of interest to you. How about this piece here? It is called Be There. Be there when inspiration calls. Yeah, be there when inspiration calls. I really particularly like that brass bit at the end there. That's so cool. Blah. Brasses are very interesting to play with, but I really like the English horn. It's a woodwind. It's a lovely, lovely instrument, the English horn. So all this stuff is composed by yours truly, and GarageBand was what I initially was composing in, but I quickly progressed up to Logic Pro 10 and acquired a good MIDI keyboard and so on, and so I key in all the different tracks, and I've actually composed, I think I got 15 symphonies now, which is quite a bit. The longest is around 73 minutes. All of my music is available through my website, stratotheoricus.com, or you can go to gertjan.ca. Either way, just look for my CD catalog, and you can order CDs. There's a catalog, and if you click on the individual pictures of the CDs, they get larger, and you can actually look at what they look like. It's Green Publishing. All the playlists are on the CD itself, and liner notes are available through my website. So there's no need to do a lot of printing. I just simply produce them and then ship them out in a jewel case, and so it just makes them relatively inexpensive. They're essentially $10 a CD, and there's usually about 60 minutes of music, sometimes a bit more per CD. And so here we are counting down. We don't have an awful lot of time left, 7 minutes, and I've done so much talking, and so I'm just going to play another piece of music for 5 minutes called The Piano Student, and then we'll wrap things up. Yeah, that was the piano student. You know, those times when you're practicing your instrument and it's just those lonely moments, and there you are, just you and your instrument, and it's a lovely day outside, and you're looking out the window, and you wish you were out there running about with your friends, and there you gotta play your instrument. Oh boy, I had moments like that growing up. You know, I was doing accordion lessons. I did 2.5 years of sort of formal music training, but sometimes, you know, rehearsals, practices were just like what I depicted there. So anyway, we are approaching the final moments of the show. I appreciate you tuning in, and please do encourage friends and family to tune in to Radio Free South Africa and to Radio Free Stratophericus on Friday, same time, same place. This is on Resolution RDO Network, hosted by blogtalkradio.com. Listen to me on Down the Rabbit Hole with Allison Alford, Andrew Carrington Hitchcock, and myself Friday mornings on Euro Talk Radio. And please do consider funding the various relief agencies striving to help relieve the plight of the white South Africans. Encourage your president, Donald Trump, in the United States to consider importing all these white people, because they will do well for you and for your nation. So anyway, thanks for listening, and until next week, good night.